So, Knightriders. Not Knight Rider with David Hasselhoff, but Knightriders, the George A. Romero movie starring Ed Harris. It was one of Ed Harris's first movies. It might have been the third movie he ever did. I know he did some, he might have done like an episode of Chips or something before that, but very, very young Ed Harris. And Ed Harris has gone on. His career has just been fantastically successful, including his work in Westworld. But I first saw Knightriders back in, I must have been like 11 or 12, and I watched Dawn of the Dead, Romero's Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, and Day of the Dead 1,000 times, so I wanted to see his other movies. So I remember when I first saw Knightriders, I was younger, and I guess I expected something more of it. I was very much bored by it, and I remember there being a lot of yelling, especially by Ed Harris. So I wanted to see Knightriders again. I wanted to see Knightriders as a not as a 13, 14-year-old or whatever, 10, 12, I don't know how old I was. I think it was made in 1981. So I was 4 or 5 when it came out, but then didn't see it until much later. So I wanted to see it again through adult eyes, through experiencing much more of life, and to see how, it's not a question of if, but how my opinion changed on the movie. So, after watching the movie, there's still a lot of yelling in it, and I think a bunch of the performances, including Ed Harris's, seems a little overacted and was pushed a little too much. But the acting was all right, and even Ed Harris's performance was all right. He had some really good moments, but a lot of it seemed heavy-handed. The message, however, in the movie was very well done. It was the theme of Knightriders was about when to compromise your ideals, when to change, and would the change be considered selling out? So is it sticking with your ideals, remaining completely idealistic, or compromising so you can be a little successful instead of struggling, even though that struggle brings its ideals? So it showed, and I think it was very well done by the Ed Harris character and then by the Tom Savini character, how these two guys expressed their belief and made good arguments for it. And then you find out in the end, the Ed Harris character ends up dying. And it's left kind of ambiguous whether he committed suicide or it was an accident, but I think Romero ended up saying that he kind of just committed suicide and was at peace with that because he didn't want to live a life anymore without sticking to his principles. That's not something I would ever do, and I hope nobody ever does this, but the way Romero expressed it, it made you at least understand where the Ed Harris character was coming from. The way this was told through the livelihood of a traveling, I guess, Renaissance fair, and using the system of knights and kings, but instead of horses, they would ride motorcycles. And even though the show they put on was theatrical, the outcome was not predetermined. So it was like pro wrestling in a way, except that in pro wrestling everything is predetermined, but in this it wasn't. So it was kind of a mix of the two. And Stephen King had a cameo, and his character kind of dismissed it, and saying, "Oh, it's just like the wrestlers, and the wrestlers know, and it's fake." So it wasn't fake in that, the characters in the fair really got hit and they really fell off their bikes, and that determined what the reality would be. So that wasn't, but of course they weren't really enemies. I'm trying to think that I don't know how successful a show like that would be now. I guess there's stuff like Medieval Times, but I don't know if Medieval Times is predetermined or not. But I don't know, maybe back in 1980, a fair like that would be popular, especially if there's nothing to do in the towns they go through, and it's just something to see. I don't know, maybe it'd be a little cheesy, but maybe I'm not the target audience for that. But for the purpose of the movie, the audiences seem to like it. Romero painted a good picture about what it's like to be on the road and the struggles you have to deal with, whether it's through crooked cops or not having enough money and getting permits and setting things up. And then, once the troupe becomes more popular, the question is what to do with it, whether to quote-unquote sell out. Is it selling out because you're getting, these sponsorships and you're getting big money backers and you'd be your show would be elevated, but if it's not the show that you want, would that be considered selling out? And again, it was very well done between Tom Savini and Ed Harris characters. As a kid, I remember the movie being slow. I don't think the movie was slow this time. I guess because there was a lot of dialogue in it, and as a kid, I guess I just wanted to see more action. I did like, for a movie that was released in 1980, how Romero tackled the gay issue, even though it was very much blatant. It wasn't kind of like, maybe if Knightriders was released today, it would be, I guess, a little less obvious. These characters came out and said, well, I'm gay and you're gay, and so they had the gay conversation in 1980, where I don't think a lot of movies were doing that. So kudos to Romero for doing that. Also, the women characters in it, how the Queen took on a leadership role, especially when Ed Harris, I'm sorry, I never remember the characters' names, especially after seeing the movie only once, but how the women, most of the women in the movie were seen as leaders. So you had the Queen taking over when Ed Harris got sent to jail. She's giving orders. She was with Ed Harris since the beginning. You had Christine Forrest, who became Romero's wife. They dated for many years and then got married after Knightriders was done. And then she was, I think I last saw her in Monkey Shine. She had a role in that. So you had the woman as the grease monkey, which I guess goes against type, especially back then, which was cool to see. And then you also had, I guess, kind of the naive young woman role in oh god, I'm forgetting her name, but she was in Babylon 5, and she was in the remake of Night of the Living Dead. So it showed, I guess, how this lifestyle can lead to, the meaning of women, and then it showed I think his name is Gary Lottie, the Lancelot character, how he picks up the woman and, sees her for a while and then just kind of dumps her because he probably realizes this life isn't for her. She may not want to get dumped, but, he had to do what he had to do, and she dropped her back off at, a home life that was less than ideal. So, I think the women characters were pretty well written. Romero was I mean, he's no longer alive, but was usually pretty good in his treatment of women characters. So the movie Knightriders itself was all right. Like I said, the bad parts about it was that the acting was a little heavy-handed. Even the storyline itself was a little heavy-handed. I liked the message. The execution wasn't the best. But then when the themes of the movie were talked about, even though it was a little heavy-handed, I liked the theme of it. I liked the debate that goes on within oneself and within the characters in the movie, and then in real life between yourselves and people that when to quote unquote get a real job, or when to not pursue anything because you have so many other responsibilities. These are real life issues, and it's faced by a lot of us. I pursued acting for 7 years after graduating college, and it was 7 years of just, I bartended, I temped. It was 7 years of a pretty grueling life. Even though I enjoyed it, it got to the point where, one, I lost my survival job, so I didn't have the money to support myself, because the money in acting, even though I kept busy, the money wasn't enough to sustain myself. So it's like, well, do I go completely broke? Do I go into debt? Do I live hand to mouth and try to, keep pushing forward and eke out a career, or do I, try to find regular work? And I ended up finding regular work because I couldn't live without a steady paycheck. I literally couldn't live without a steady paycheck. It's just very uncomfortable being broke all the time. And I know people who are still pursuing a career in the arts, and and it's a very, very tough life. They're either doing extra work all the time, which is not rewarding, or they're living paycheck to paycheck, and they're sleeping on couches, and they'll get a gig, and then they won't have a gig, and they'll be out of work. It's a constant temp job, and it's really tough. So I guess the older I got, the more I crave stability, but at the same time, I also crave that kind of life that I had. It's just not sustainable. I want to afford to do other things I don't want to do, like travel, and live somewhat comfortably without going completely broke. So if I am going to give anybody any kind of advice, is sure, pursue your passion 100%, 110%, 120%, but at the end of the day, have a viable plan B. And like your plan B, be almost as passionate for your plan B, or hopefully you're just as passionate with your plan B, but at least have a viable plan B. And the key word is viable. You want something where you're able to support yourself. So anyway, Knightriders was definitely an enjoyable film. George A. Romero, it's one of his favorites, next to another movie he did called Martin. So you can tell it's both of these movies were labors of love, and I'm glad I watched it. It was really cool to see a young Ed Harris, just to know what he's done since then, and just to know that Romero was played a key role in getting him that. And when I saw the DVD, Ed Harris was actually interviewed. The DVD was only a couple of years old, so it was nice that Ed Harris still remembers that time and remembers it fondly and remembers George A. Romero and the opportunity Romero gave Ed Harris. It's nice to see that. So and it kind of almost made me want to go on the road, man, and almost made me want to ride a motorcycle. I'm not too keen on that. Maybe one day I'll try it. So pretty good stuff by Romero. He's had better, his zombie trilogy are some of my favorite movies. Creepshow is such a great movie. I haven't seen that in a while, but I think I would like it if I saw it again. So great. So I would say give Knightriders a chance, just for the theme, just for the main theme alone. Like I said, a little melodramatic, a little heavy-handed, but the theme itself is something that I think would be good for all of you to watch. So I also think it'll be good for all of you to share this podcast, rate this podcast, and you can do that by going on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Mike Lane Act. That's MikeLaneAct. You can find me on Facebook at Mike Lane Actor. And you can email me at mikelaneact@yahoo.com. And like I said, please rate and share and do all that good stuff. All right, everyone, until next time, take it easy. Bye.